problem that impacts 10,000 people is very different from a problem that impacts 1 million people. You have a very different market size and the ability to scale. A lot of founders will start something in their home country, but immediately look to expand into bigger and safer markets, which in many ways unfortunate because they're taking that away from the country that they're from. And it's just like really sad to have that as one of the impacts of these global conflicts. The challenge with building a services business on the back of startups is most startups fail. In terms of an LTV and longevity perspective, it's not there.
Welcome back to the SDR Hire podcast. Today, guys, I'm talking with Keo Sar, an investor, an operational magician, and an old friend. Keo has spent the last, let's say, 10 years at least, if not even 20, leading operations teams, sales, revenue teams, GTM teams, whatever you want to call them. They've changed names over the last few years across financial services, fintech, multiple SaaS companies, predominantly in the startup space, where he spinned up SDR teams, optimized sales teams, streamlined operations for all of these companies. And today he's running his own consultancy business and advising startups on how to build and grow their GTM motions as well as their operations. So Keo, man, this is long overdue. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Stefan. Yeah, definitely long overdue. I know we've talked about this for some time now. Glad we're able to finally make this happen. Looking forward to the conversation.
Same here, man. And to be honest, it's been a while since you and I had a chance to meet back at Shift. It was in 2020. It was earlier in my career. And I remember you as a guy who you always gave off that everything's going to be fine. Let's get to the bottom of whatever is wrong. And I think you have that attitude towards everything that you do even today. But what's been happening since Shift, and we have been trying to get a hold of each other for this recording. What's happening in your world right now?
Yeah, I guess a little color would be helpful. Like you mentioned, I've spent the better part of over a decade helping to build and scale startups, being what you would call an operator. So heading operations, sales, business development. I've touched almost everything on the business side. And post-Shift, it was, I would say, an opportunity to hit the reset button a little bit, because between the grind of building startups for that long and then just also going through a personal tragedy at the time, I thought it was like a good time to just take a step back. So I actually took about a 6-month sabbatical. And then when I came back, it was some of the questions I was trying to answer for myself was like, how do you want to impact the world? And what are the things that you actually believe in that you want to build your life around? And the essence for me was just impact and freedom. So how do I leverage all my knowledge, experience, network to be able to make an impact, especially in emerging countries and emerging markets like Serbia? And then the freedom aspect was really the freedom to be able to work on the projects that I thought were interesting, work with people that I wanted to work on with, and just having that ultimately that choice to be able to do those things. And for me, it's an earned privilege. So I started getting involved in the ecosystem here in Serbia as a mentor, as part of an accelerator that was funded by the Japanese government, JICA. And it was called the Ninja Accelerator. So I did some workshops and then mentored a handful of startups. From there, was introduced to other accelerators, incubators within Serbia. And then that started to extend to the entire region, to the Western Balkan region. So I've been fortunate enough to do work in like Bosnia and Montenegro and Albania and North Macedonia. So it's been a really cool journey, because typically what I find is founders in emerging markets are trying to solve real problems. And they're not just trying to build widgets to sell them, which is nothing wrong with that. People make a lot of money off of lifestyle businesses. But when I tend to get more activated, interested, and involved when I'm able to see that there's a real problem that is trying to be solved. And through that process, advising a handful of companies, being an angel investor, going through a VC program with the ultimate aim of longer term, either building or being in a fund, or just doing something more independently via syndicates or SVPs, where we're making direct investments into companies through my network. Yeah, so it's been a cool few years post-Shift, and I've been happy to be involved in a lot of different things.
Real quick, if you're a sales leader or you know someone who's looking for support when it comes to cold outreach, cold calling, cold email, LinkedIn outreach, we build SDR and BDR teams for companies or complement their existing teams with top talent, remote SDRs and BDRs that are exceptional in outreach skills. So if you'd like to get in touch, just visit sdrhire.com and book a call with our team. All right, back to the show. I'm so happy that you actively searched for your why and then started acting towards fulfilling it while serving others, which is, I think, your whole theme and why I enjoy so much spending time with you and talking with you. And I see that you are extremely active when it comes to not just investing and advising, but also doing some volunteering work and just being helpful, which is beautiful. And you've had some amazing advice for me on a couple of occasions, which I'm extremely grateful for. But what are you really seeing in the market? It's interesting that you mentioned the region, and because it's obviously emerging, it's obviously getting more attention from outside investors, from capital, from different parts of Europe or Middle East for that matter, or the US. And then what are you seeing currently in the market? Where are founders seeing opportunities and where business is being spun up right now?
Yeah, from a global perspective, obviously AI is still hot and it's still attracting a majority of investments because I think investors right now are trying to make bets wherever they can. Because my opinion of the industry is like over the next few years, it will start to consolidate. Right? There's no way that all these companies that have been funded will survive. It's just part of the power law, number one. Number two, not every company or product has a market. And over time that gets proven. I see consolidation in the market. But I think specifically to the region, right? So you start with a breadth and depth of like tech talent. So if you're looking at just the Western Balkans and specifically Serbia, because that's where we're both at, that's where the tech ecosystem really started, was like outsourcing IT talent. And it became, I would say, at a global level, what it was known for. And then over time, and I would say this is probably the last maybe 4 or 5 years, there started to be this infusion of business skills. Yep. And you combine that with the IT talent, then you start building businesses. And what's been cool too is I've also met a lot of Serbian diaspora that they went abroad, whether it's like for education or to start businesses, and have become successful and are now coming back. Several of them have started a business, whether it was a startup or just your more common businesses, and then also building funds that are being operated out of Serbia. So that's cool. I think from a regional perspective, Serbia is at the center of it all from an innovation ecosystem, because many of them started at around the same place, and you just see Serbia doing this while the other ecosystems are still trying to figure out their way. But if we can fast forward a few years, I think Serbia is going to be like the beacon for the region, and you'll start to see some more success stories, which hopefully allows it to spread and reciprocate into other countries in the region as well. So that's what I'm seeing from a local perspective. Like I said, it's gaining tons of attention. I think next week there's the Split conferences. I just remember speaking at the first one a few years ago, and now it's the third rendition. It's gotten bigger and better every single year, which kind of speaks to the environment, because you've got international companies coming in, international investors, and it's really cool to see and actually be here during this time and also be involved in it. So
exactly, I think these early days of creating like a legacy and like a very impressive program that's going to develop over the next 10, 15, 20 years. I think it's a beautiful place to be in. And obviously there's a lot of programs that are providing funds, either the state or whoever, that are like non-refundable, or
they're providing non-dilutive capital.
Exactly. And there's so much opportunity. I know a lot of friends of mine who are starting startups and trying to ride that wave, and I think they're doing a great job. And by the way, like I asked you if there was a specific industry that was standing out, and it doesn't seem like there is one specific, and that has been my experience as well. I know folks that are doing anything from helping disabled people to like agri-tech to fintech to a lot of different startups. But what are some things that people are missing out on, in your opinion? Like, where do you see the gap? What are people missing or not seeing today that they might start seeing or at least need help with going forward?
Yeah, I think it's, if you're talking about specific industries, to your point, like a lot of it's being covered, right? Because you do have like fintechs coming out of here. You have a lot of agri-tech. There's some health tech companies, a lot of ed tech companies.
Yep.
I think if I were to look at the canvas of it, and there's probably two areas that I would love to see more companies take a look at, is solving the logistics space for the region.
Interesting.
It's because quite complicated, like just your basic shipping and receiving and cross-border commerce. So I think that's one that I would take a look at. And then the second one, which is related to that, is what does e-commerce or like cross-border commerce look like?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. It's so funny. I constantly, I tell my wife, because I hate our last mile delivery, post express. It's just terrible. Your packages end up being destroyed, or it's just a mess. And I keep telling her, like, let's just start this business. I know it's super hard, and it's insane to start such a business like on a whim, but somebody really needs to solve that, because it's it's like terrible how bad it is. On the other hand, we've got players like Alibaba and Temu just swooping in. Temu is like all over the place. Alibaba, I think, is launching like a regional distribution center, whatever. So there might be opportunities there to launch businesses off of those resources, maybe drop shipping, maybe something in those lines. I don't know. What do you think?
You could, obviously, but I would love to see like a local edition. Like someone locally like solve that problem.
Yeah.
Because I think that would be like a really cool story. Because and I'll just give you an example. Like every time I go to Bosnia, I get a couple of requests from people like, "Oh, can you bring this back to me?" Because it's something that they ordered or bought, and it's such a pain to just get it shipped to Serbia that they rather just wait and have someone go there and bring it back with them. That's crazy to me.
Exactly.
In this supposed modern world that we live in. So like I said, I think if there's someone able to crack that code, not only will obviously they benefit from it financially, but I think it would provide a huge impact to businesses as well, because it opens up markets. It's a reality, right?
The problems that I see, for example, with delivery and like buying from like international buying, it's like if I buy anything above 50 euros, there's this whole process that the package needs to go through, and it's actually going to be an additional 30 euros. It's basically you're paying 60% on top of whatever it's crazy. And it's better if I can just call up my friend, hey, can you buy this for me? And then when they come, I can just collect that from them. But I agree with you. That would be super cool. Do you know anyone doing anything remotely similar?
I am. I actually met with a team when I was in North Macedonia earlier in the year. So it was cool. Like GIZ and the local ecosystem, but they basically brought the founders together, and the founders were one was from Serbia, and I think the other two were from North Macedonia, and they put them together to solve this problem. So the solution that they came up with, I think, would work, but there's a lot of hurdles on the government and regulatory side that they're going to have to navigate. And that was I would say, the big red flag for me as an investor. I was like, do you have the network or the resources to be able to navigate those waters? Because if you do, then you have great business. But if you don't, it's going to be extremely challenging to figure out how to scale this business. Yeah, I haven't had an opportunity to check in with them. Maybe it's time to see how they're doing.
I went to a business school and we did a lot of like case study competitions, stuff like that. But I think we never understood these things until we started actually working in the markets. The idea is cool, and the problem that you're trying to solve is often very cool. But do you actually have the resources to do it? It's not like you need a strategy. Like the only strategy this team would need, or anyone for that matter, would be, do you have the right connections and the network to go over those technical governmental hurdles? And obviously we need to take into consideration how big of a stakeholder government is in this region. And I see you smiling there. But that's interesting. And so speaking of your investments, what are some key criteria that you're looking at? Obviously, in addition to, can the business model actually work? But what do you look for when you're evaluating a startup to invest in?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And because you can ask 10 different investors the same question, you'll probably get 10 different answers.
Exactly.
So I'll give you my answer, which is I want the founders to have a really deep understanding of the problem that they're actually solving. Because often what I see is they don't have a deep enough understanding of the problem, then they start building a solution. And by the time they've actually realized that they've actually solving the wrong problem, they've already spent all these resources trying to solve this problem that they initially came up with. I look at like that problem fit, right? There's the market problem fit. Is it an actual problem? Number one. Number two, like how big is the problem, right? Because a problem that impacts 10,000 people is very different from a problem that impacts 1 million people. You have a very different market size and the ability to scale. And then from there, I look at the founder problem fit. So meaning, okay, great, you've identified the problem, but why are you the founder or the founding team to be able to solve this problem? If you're trying to solve a financial services problem, or like we were just talking about the logistics problem, what in your background or experience or network tells me that you're going to be able to solve this problem? If you were in ed tech before and you're like, okay, I'm just going to go solve logistics because I couldn't get something delivered to me that I really wanted, I'm going to have a lot of questions. And it's going to be a big red flag for me. And then I would say that the third part of that is like the solution problem fit, right? If you've identified the problem, does your solution actually solve it? Or at least like you're able to solve like a first iteration of it, because like we both know nothing's ever final, right? Your solution is going to evolve. Sometimes your problem evolves as you continue to talk to more customers or potential customers, and that changes over time. So I would say that's one, the problem criteria. And then from there, I look at it as the founder psychology, right? Meaning, if you're crazy enough to start a business, are you crazy enough to see it through?
Yeah.
Because you're going to have actually more challenges than you are going to have successes. And that's been my experience, right? Can you navigate and push through those extremely challenging times to get to, which is often like just a series of peaks where you're like, yeah, we think we found product market fit. And then it's this again, up and down. And then you're like, oh, okay, we just raised this round. Cool. It's a different set of problems now that you're trying to have to solve. You have to have the stomach for it ultimately. And I would say before I make it, I typically spend a lot of time, or try to spend a lot of time with the founders before I make any decision. Because at this point, I'm not investing with other people's money. I'm investing my own money.
Yeah.
So I get founders who want me to make a quick decision, and I'm very upfront with them. Like, if you want me to make a quick decision, I'm not your guy. The last company I invested in, it took over a year for me to finally invest in the company, because I gave them feedback. And to their credit, they stuck through it. They kept coming back to give me updates. And when they finally flipped the formula, and it was just like as part of the feedback that I gave to them, I'm like, okay, now this is an interesting business. Let's keep talking. And then I finally invested into the company earlier this year. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Nice.
Are you satisfied with the investment?
Oh, I am. Yeah, like they're incredible founders, very proactive, and they ask the right questions, and they, for the most part, bootstrapped the business until recently, where they've started to raise capital from investors.
That's very cool. So let me sum what you just said. I think this is an important piece of your investment strategy. It's basically you look for, is this an actual problem that's being solved? Are these people actually good at solving this problem? And then, or like, are they fit to solve this problem? And then does the solution that they came up with actually solve the problem that they initially wanted? Then on top of that, you look for that grit in the founders, where they just have to endure a lot of shit over a long period of time until they actually come out on the other end. And I think that's not too far away from what other people are considering when they're investing. But I think that what's unique with you is you really spend a lot of time vetting them and making sure that it is the right investment, and that it's not just about you getting your money back, but it's also, is the investment actually gonna provide what it's supposed to, and is it going to actually be fuel for growth rather than just sport? I guess
it is.
That's how I'm reading that.
Yeah, and I'm the type of investor that also wants to be involved, right?
Mm.
Because like
Okay. In
you
what
know,
way?
through my, it could be as simple as, hey, like once a month, let's hop on a call
Mm.
just so I understand where the company's at and where you need help. Or it's me saying, look, like take a look at my network. If you think I can make intros for you, happy to do that. When they're ready for fundraise, same thing, right? Let's go through your deck. Let me make some introductions to investors, or if I have potential clients that would be a good fit for them, I'll make that intro as well, because there's obviously like the financial incentive, but like a lot of the companies I work with are also, I would say, the third category. Like what's the impact that they're actually making on the world? Like I want to enable them to do that even more. Yeah.
And do you mind
Mm.
sharing what your portfolio roughly looks like, maybe from the number of companies and then what types of companies, or at least just giving us an understanding of what your portfolio looks like industry wise or something like that?
Yeah. So my portfolio, my personal portfolio is 5 or 6 companies. Like I said, I make a few concentrated bets a year, which is the reason why I think longer term I want to, like I said, start forming syndicates or be involved in a fund where we can deploy more capital. But my background is in fintech and marketplace businesses. So those are the kinds of businesses that I know really well. So the last company I invested in was a fintech company. But beyond that, the current portfolio is actually quite mixed because there's one that's doing like HR tech. There's another one that's doing more of a tech enabled lifestyle widget. It was a friend. It was a different kind of decision criteria. The other one is a e-commerce marketplace in an emerging market.
All right, cool. And yeah, again, I wasn't sure should we go into this direction or not,
Mm,
meaning the current geopolitical happenings and the war and everything. But I am actually curious, what do you think? How will this current situation? So we're talking about the conflicts in the Middle East. We've got to the north of Serbia. We've got the war with between Russia and Ukraine. How do these
mm.
things impact, or how do you think they would impact the investment scene here and the businesses in general? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I want to start with, I think it's just terrible tragedies globally with what's happening around the world. And it just makes me question, have we lost our humanity to the point of no return? And I don't know that. I don't have a clear answer. I have a lot of questions without answers. And I'll leave that for now to address the the question around how does that impact businesses and how does that impact investments, and what is an investor at the end of the day? They're a risk manager. They're trading the opportunity for the risk ultimately. In an environment where the risk has gone up significantly, most investors will pull back, right? Because they're assessing companies on market risk, on reputation risk, on financial risk, you name it, you go down the list, right? And geopolitical conflict is a huge risk because it ultimately impacts the business in our current environment. And you've seen it, like the Ukraine was like very strong for funding and a startup ecosystem, but like the war has disrupted that. Same thing in parts of the Middle East as well. It's been highly disruptive because investors pull back because it presents risk. And then just from a business perspective, it's sad, right? Because you see these companies that in under normal circumstances in a normal environment would probably thrive, right? So you're seeing this migration now of companies in the Middle East. They will typically start them there, right? So I'll give you an example. There's a company I've been unofficially advising in Lebanon. They're a company called Kudwa. They're like a, call it a CFO in a box. Amazing founders. They check all the boxes from my criteria that we talked about, right? But they started the company in Lebanon, but immediately registered it in the UAE. But now they're seeing the opportunity in the US. So they're actually their parent company now, and this was just pretty recent because I met with them while I was in the country recently. Their parent company is now headquartered in the US because like you can raise more money in the US. It's a much bigger market. And given this topic, is safer. You see a lot of founders will start something in their home country, but immediately look to expand into bigger and safer markets, which is in many ways unfortunate because they're taking that away from the country that they're from. And it's just like really sad to have that as one of the impacts of these global conflicts.
That's right. Yeah, that's very sad, and there are so many things we could talk about on this topic, but I do want to stick to the business side of things. But it reminded me of also of some behavior that I've seen here as well in Serbia,
Mm,
where uh, taking into account that the market is fairly small, even when you
mm,
look at the whole Balkans, it's still not too big of a market, and then people try to start register businesses in the US or UK. And actually, it has become increasingly hard to do those things simply due to some regulations that I've heard, especially, for example, the UK government is imposing. And it's become a little bit harder, but I know that a lot of people during the last 15 years, especially during the like drop shipping boom, were trying to like start companies in the US where they could do everything and then but still live here and take advantage potentially of, let's say, lower costs here. But it just reminded me, considering the Serbia is like a post-war kind of economy, but it seems like it starts right there when the war starts, and then who knows how long will the
mm.
Middle East be decimated in that way. But moving on to some less, let's say, tragic topics, being in your shoes and having the opportunity to, first of all, work with so many companies on their operations and scaling their operations. And then also, we're talking about sales, and this is
Mm.
obviously a sales oriented podcast. You must have had a lot of opportunities hiring people. And so I was really curious, and this is extremely selfish of me, but I'm very curious about your hiring strategies and how do you recognize great talent? Knowing you, I know that you don't really care where the talent is coming from.
Right.
What are your criteria for recognizing and finding great talent?
Mm. Yeah, it's a good question. I'll start with understanding the culture of the company, of their environment that you're operating in, right? So I've always done this thing at every company I've been with, because you also have microcultures within companies, right? And at the company level, the culture is usually set by the CEO or founding team. And then ideally, if it's a good culture, it'll start to like filter down to the rest of the company. But what I've always done, and I've done this because when you're managing a department that's part of a larger company, that department still, in my opinion, still needs a culture of its own, right? Kind of like a set of unwritten rules, but in my case, they're written because usually, like when I start at a company, I take everyone through a cultural orientation. So that way they understand what I expect out of them, what they can expect from my leadership team and myself, and what the rules of the game are, whether it's like you're part of the sales team, operations, customer success. So I start there, and I want to make sure that there's a culture fit first. One of them being like, I don't care how talented you are, don't be an asshole. Pretty easy one to start with. But from there, it's matching the job to be done to their skill set. Or do they have the ability to learn? So culture, the skill set matching, and then I'm a passionate lifelong learner, and I want my team to be the same. So are they flexible enough to be able to learn and adapt to whether it's a new environment, new technology, new product, new people, whatever is thrown at them, or they so ingrained in their way of doing things or thinking that they're inflexible? Because that's not going to work for me. And then I would say the fourth category is like, how do they overcome challenges? So I typically ask them to walk me through challenges that they've gone through. And this doesn't necessarily even have to be related to work challenges. It can be like challenges in their personal lives, because those are actually oftentimes more trickier to navigate and more sensitive to navigate, among other things. And you and I've had this discussion before. And then I would say that the fifth thing that I probably need to check the box for me is just like, what is their level of passion? Because I always tell people that, look, like if you're coming on board or if you're already on board, I know you're not going to be here forever. However, in the time that you're here, I want to make sure that you give it your best because I want to be able to give you our best as well and make you that the experience that you have with the company an enriching one and that you can get whatever you need out of it as well. And when you have that conversation, it takes the wall down and people are like, oh, you don't expect me to be here forever. I'm like, no, but while you're here, make the best of it. Make as much money as you can, get promoted as much as you can, do all those things. And then when you're ready to embark on your next journey, leave on a good note and don't burn bridges. And then it's all good because I've oftentimes I you circle back and you bump into people that you worked with previously and you may or end up partnering with them on some things. And that's the kind of people I want on my team.
Yeah, it sounds like you really have a thorough process. I'm just curious about one thing, which is when you are deciding whether they're an asshole or not, whether you're deciding whether their skills match the job description or whatever they're going to be being challenged by in the role. How do you actually do that? Is it a set of tests, questions, role plays? What is the actual thing that you do to see?
Yeah. What I'm doing in that instance is I'm assessing ownership and accountability, right? So typically I'll ask them for a story, like, tell me a time where you made a mistake and that what happened? Did you own up to it? And what were the lessons from that? Like, how did that fundamentally change the way you operated moving forward? Because that tells me whether or not they're the type of person that will be able to accept accountability and be able to take like critical feedback. Similar along those lines, I'll ask something like, what's the most critical piece of feedback that you've gotten from your boss or your manager? And what was your reaction to that? And why do you think they said what they said? And from there, I can assess whether they get defensive or they're like they took the feedback and rolled with it and applied it and it made them a better person or not. Yeah.
That's good. It just reminded me of a question that I recently started asking my candidates. That famous, what are your flaws, whatever. And I think it's a very stupid question, but then everybody's gonna be like, oh, I just, Michael Scott, I just work too hard or bullshit like that. And so it's in our nature to answer that way. And that's totally fine. It's us who are asking the question that need to ask the question differently. And the one question that I started asking is, if I were to have a chat right after this call with your boss, CEO, whoever you worked with before, what negative thing they say about you? What is the thing that they might say you would need improving on? Oh, that opens up so many doors. And like they just, because they then realize, oh shit, this person might actually reach out to my previous employer and ask about that. And then they open up with some genuine things. And that gives me sort of a perspective. By the way, the reason why I asked you this is I've been like working with predominantly SDRs and BDRs over the last few years. And I've come to a conclusion that there are more or less two types, right? The government official, right? The person behind the glass window, not giving a shit. And then a proactive go-getter who might be even a startup founder. And I think it really comes down to proactive versus reactive, the types of personalities, where the reactive type is more like entitled, more, oh, you need to provide me this in order for me to do it. And then there are people who are just hungry, and I wouldn't really put them in the buckets of A, B players. It's, you can have both in both buckets. It's more than, are you hungry to do things, right? Are you hungry to learn? Are you hungry to make a difference? Are you hungry to show the world that you've got something to prove? And to your point, acknowledging the fact that they won't be there forever is, I think, a very powerful tool for them to feel more comfortable in doing things that they're supposed to do. So that's why I was asking, because it is so challenging to find those nuggets from people and pull out of them whether they're going to be a good employee or at least are going to match what I'm looking for or not.
Yeah, 100%. The question that you started off with, if I were to ask like a former employer or boss what they would say, but I think that's an amazing question. Because it starts something like, oh, like, what if they do a reference check? They're going to tell me.
Exactly.
But I think it's a great question, and to basically weed out what people are actually about.
It's been a journey, like figuring those things out. I think I went into entrepreneurship fairly young, let's put it like that,
Hmm.
without too much experience managing teams and hiring too many people. And it's been a learning curve over the last few years. But
Oh, you're doing great, man.
yeah, thank you. Speaking of entrepreneurship, it's not something that you're not familiar with, and so
Mm.
you've been doing some advising, some consulting, but you're running your own studio. Does that studio involve only like consulting and advising, just like what we've been talking about, or do you actually come in and build parts of products or have equity in other companies in that sense as a studio, helping them grow with your own resources rather than just advising?
Yeah, it's not my studio. So I'm a smaller partner because I joined the firm in December, and one of the founding partners, he's a really good friend of mine. We've known each other for a decade. And the conversation really started with like when I went on his podcast last year, and then we were catching up afterwards. And I think it was like a month after that. He's like, how about you just come join us as our CEO because we need to figure out a lot of things. Okay. But I would say we operate under three pillars, right? There's the consulting piece where, and we mostly work with like mid-market and enterprise companies, which is interesting because both he and I like, come from startup backgrounds. We love startups and innovation. But the challenge with building a services business on the back of startups is most startups fail. Just in terms of an LTV and longevity perspective, it's not there. The second aspect of it is because startups are by nature extremely lean, they tend to ask for extended payment terms, discounts. So it becomes an operational nightmare, right? Look at innovation. It's not just innovation through a startup or a new technology or a new process or whatever it is, because you've got existing businesses, whether they're SMBs or enterprises that have many problems to solve that they don't know how to do through technologies. For example, like through SMBs, what typically happens is the owners operators are industry experts. They know their verticals really well. They typically don't have someone in-house that is a CTO or technical enough to say, okay, this is how we scale the business through technology. This is the roadmap we need to follow. So for us, that's where the consulting piece comes in. With enterprise clients, they're so big. And we're in this age of, I would say, accelerated AI because AI has been around since the 50s, where they get a mandate from the top, from the board, and whether it's like a general manager or a head of department, go do AI. And they're like, what are you talking about? So in that regard, we try to answer the question of like, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. So part of the consulting process is figuring out where a digital transformation centered around AI is going to have the biggest impact for that business. So we can start testing things most immediately. And then from there, we can start looking at where else the business can apply this technology. So that's the core of the business. So the three pillars are consult, educate, and then build. So oftentimes we're either building proprietary technology for these clients or just helping them figure out the right tech stack for their business. But through that process, because the company is now 9 years old, we've invested or taken equity positions into company in exchange for the technology build and mostly at the pre-seed and seed stages. Because we've done so much of it, we can quickly understand what is the technology that actually needs to be built for a particular problem or particular set of problems, and also be able to see, does this business actually have potential longevity? If it does, we'll try to get involved a little bit deeper, either via an investment or trading equity for the build, or just utilizing our network to help them actually grow and scale the business. So it comes in many flavors. I would say the other aspect of this, and this is like the work that I do on my own, again, is I advise a handful of companies, and it's at different stages right now. So all three of the companies I advise right now are going through fundraising, right? So like we're spending time on calls reviewing their pitch decks, reviewing their investment memos, building the pitch deck, talking about, okay, what's the strategy for growth? Like how do we expand and grow? So it just depends on where the company is at in its life cycle, but it's typically revolved around business development and sales and scaling those. So call it just bucket it under go to market. and then fundraising seem to be the most critical needs at an early stage. Because once you've started to figure out product market fit, you start to hit the growth stage, then you'll deal with the more operational problems, and we can address that when we get there.
I see. It's just interesting. It got me thinking. That's actually something that I've seen early stage companies struggle with as well, which is exactly what you just mentioned, especially on the go-to-market side of things, where just we hire BDRs, or do we hire salespeople, or do we hire both? And I've seen companies, even more mature companies, hire, for example, they hire a VP of sales, and they think that's going to solve the problem of sales, but they don't have a problem of sales. They, like, the founder can close anything. They have a problem of like lead generation and branding and like whatever lead flow, basically, whatever way you get the leads. And then 9 months later, 12 months later, nothing's happening because the VP of sales isn't the lead generation person. He's a VP of sales. Like, he can close deals, he can whatever. On the other hand, sometimes founders, at least what I see, hire junior sales reps, and then they expect them to do lead gen, understand how to use AI in lead gen, and then also close deals, and then also nurture clients into ascending or upselling them, whatever. So I think that there's more than enough room for somebody who's going to tell those founders, like, hey, chill out. Here's what you need to do. And I love that aspect. Have you heard of these stories as well?
Oh, 100%, all the time. Because the critical things that they need to get right is the product, number one. And this isn't in any order necessarily, but it's the product and then the hiring aspect of it. And the decision not to hire is just as critical as the decision to hire. Because at an early stage, and I absolutely on board with like founder-led sales. And then from there, making sure that you as the founder or founding team are building the playbook so that you can hand it off to whether it's a head of sales or head of go-to-market, whatever it is, to continue to do that. But you only do that when you're actually ready for the next iteration, like in stage of the company.
That's right.
And you're ready to spend resources on it.
It's so tough. I love the fact that you came on board and you found some time to chat with me. Obviously, we're going to catch each other around in Belgrade, but I'm really glad that we did this and that you came on and I got you to share a little bit of your experience and expertise. And I would just love to finish it off with just a message that you would send to our audience, to our listeners, and to the world in general.
Oof. I think right now it's the message is find ways to be kinder, to be more caring, and to be more tolerant. Because at the rate that we're going, there's not going to be much left. And I know we always, as human beings, are resilient and have the ability to regenerate and rebuild. But if you don't have to destroy something, why do it in the first place?
Message, especially these days, considering what's going on in the Middle East and everything. And so I know that this is a sensitive topic in general, and I know it's close to your heart as well. And so I appreciate you for coming on, especially these days, and sharing your message as well. I really appreciate you, man. Thanks for doing this.
No, it's my pleasure, man. I'm like I said, I'm very happy we were able to connect and able to do this. And I've loved seeing your journey and the successes that you've had, but also appreciate you opening up about the struggles that you've had being an entrepreneur and a founder, and the many pivots that I know you've made.
Appreciate you, man. Appreciate you very much.
Yeah, for sure, man. Anytime.